Thank you everybody for coming to this next Greenplum chat. My name is Greg Chase. I am the pivotal maestro for community, so it's my pleasure to convene the panel with the famous Ivan Novik as our chief spokesman. So Ivan, what are we going to talk about today?
Hey everybody. Today we're going to be talking about the Greenplum Workload Manager. This feature really helps us bring enterprise capability to data warehousing systems. So that's the topic, workload management.
We have a distinguished panel here. Ivan, why don't you tell us who we have joining us?
Well, okay, going around from left to right on the screen, Bharat Sitaraman and Bharat, do you guys want to introduce yourselves real quick? Like, sure. One sentence intro.
Hey guys, I'm Bharat Sitaraman. I'm the product manager for Greenplum Workload Manager.
Louis Mignano.
How you doing? I'm Louis Mignano. I work for Pivotal Data Engineering, working with many of our customers to ensure they're successful with our products, Greenplum, Hawk, and others.
Derek Comagore. Derek Comagore is the man without the mic. All right.
I was working a minute ago.
You should work on that. Greg Chase, you already introduced yourself.
Yes.
Why don't you give your one sentence?
No problem. I am the community marketing here at Pivotal for all things open source and sometimes commercial.
Okay, Dan Basquet.
Technical marketing for Greenplum and HDB Hawk.
Great. So, Greg, are we ready to dig in?
Let's dig in.
Okay. So, first question for the panel here is, why does a data warehouse need a workload manager? What is the function, and what type of user persona is really targeting, and what use case does it enable in a data warehouse? So, anybody want to volunteer to kick that off? I'll nominate Bharat to volunteer.
Bharat.
Yeah. So, Greenplum and Postgres, which is based off, are great databases, but they're very naive in their implementations. All they're used to is basically running queries. There's no sort of scheduling or management solution that's built on top of Greenplum that allows the cluster, the system, to be able to, handle all the queries, all the workloads in a time-sensitive as well as resource-sensitive fashion. And so that's where we introduced Workload Manager.
So how does this become a problem? Does like one of maybe Derek or Louis can...
So maybe another way to say it is, from the field side, is what type of user experience would you have without a workload manager?
I mean, what we hear in the field is people refer to like that dreaded power user, that one user that can come in and just kind of dominate the entire system with one bad query. The fact is that user is an equal opportunity destroyer. I mean, that's not unique to Greenplum. That's something that's unique to just ad hoc, databases in general. If you're going to allow that type of access, you're going to have these types of users. But the other place where I see Workload Manager being very important is, I've always, prior to coming to Pivotal, I worked with a lot of our, worked in the enterprises. Many of those enterprises are customers today, and owned a lot of database systems. And it wasn't always just the dreaded power user, it was just those normal users that just all decided to schedule their reports at 7 a.m. in the morning because they wanted the reports ready for when they got in the morning. So it's also, Workload Manager is also useful for normalizing the spikes in your normal daily schedule, whether it be ETL or just ad hoc reporting or web access, all those kinds of things can be normalized through Workload Manager.
Right. Derek, do you have your mic working?
I believe so now.
Excellent.
So why don't you give your one sentence intro, and also kind of your take on where the use case for Workload Manager comes in?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, second time around. Nice to meet everyone. Derek Comagore, and I work in data engineering here out of the Midwest. And to the second question, similar along the same lines. So having power users or a lot of data scientists as well tend to need to extract a lot of features and records out of relational databases. And certainly MPP databases like Greenplum Database are not excluded from that. In fact, Greenplum in particular is very well adapted to doing data science. So as a result, we have to have
even better workload management capabilities than perhaps a lot of the pure database products, including other MPP offerings in the space have. So that's the requirement and the use case upon us collectively, and as you'll see in the rest of this show, we've got a lot of great capabilities in the workload management space.
Right, and just to complete the circle here, Dan, any experiences you want to share from customers you've seen where workload management is a problem and how features like this could come in?
I think I'd echo a lot of what the data engineering guys said. I mean, there's always that one or two people are always trying to do something above and beyond what everyone else is doing, and a lot of times they're capable of doing that, and a lot of times maybe they're not, and they do some interesting, strange things in SQL. Right, either be a BI tool or something like that just gets it really out of control. So these kind of tools really help sort of pull all that workload in and make it much more palatable to the whole enterprise.
Right. So what I'm hearing from Brock, go ahead.
I was going to say the best analogy that I've heard and given to friends who don't even know, Greenplum Database, or when I'm trying to explain this product to them, is basically when you think of your body as a Greenplum database, and it has no way of regulating itself, but you have your brain, and so your brain essentially is monitoring all these signals and tells you, when to slow down if you're running too fast, or if you feel some sort of pain, to sort of check it out and examine it. It's the easiest way, the best analogy, I guess, for a person who's new to Greenplum and new to Workload Manager. It essentially is monitoring all these signals and taking action based off of them.
So I thought you were going to say it was like your mom.
So let's bring it to more specifics a little bit. So what are some features in particular that the Workload Manager has that would prevent a single user from consuming all the resources on the system, or that make it so that the pain of too many users trying to step over each other is alleviated?
The basic level Workload Manager essentially allows you to either log queries that might be exceeding various thresholds based off of rules that you define. So essentially, you create these rules as a DBA or the equivalent. You create these rules to be able to monitor certain thresholds that you might exceed on your system, and you can either log them, throttle CPU, or outright terminate queries that might be exceeding either a certain amount of memory or SKU or even runtime. Or if you know particular problematic users, you can terminate their queries at particular times.
If at the risk of something like going back to the prior question,
No, to go back.
If expert administrator, maybe I'm even just a user, what are the symptoms I would see if somebody's overusing or is already using the Greenplum database to the maximum? What are the kinds of errors or conditions or problems that would come up?
I think primarily what we see is customers will say that there's inconsistency, right? So you might have ran your report yesterday, you ran it, it took a couple of seconds. Today it's taken maybe a minute. And to an end user, that doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah.
They're like, I didn't change anything, right? The dreaded, I didn't change anything, right? We hear all the time. Every DBA has heard that, right? But in this case, it probably is true. They didn't change anything. Stuff changed within the system, right? Workloads and workflow has changed within the system that could be impacting those users. So that is primarily the behavior you're going to see. I mean, obvious physics behavior. I mean, you might run out of memory, things like that. I mean, that's basic physics.
So guys, I'm still a little bit fuzzy on what we're talking about, and I want to bring it to specifics. So can you give me an example of the simplest possible rule that you could create that could then add value to a Greenplum install?
Yeah, so one of our basic use cases actually, one of our first customers was running into massive out of memory and segment down issues. And in order to understand why that was happening, first we decided to write some rules to be able to log thresholds, basically saying when you reach greater than 90% of memory on a given host, we want to be able to log the queries that are causing this. And then by extension, we were then able to say, okay, terminate these specific types of queries. And since then, that particular customer has not run into any out of memory issues.
So you're saying you've got a rule that says if condition X happens, kill the query.
Kill the query.
right? And what types of conditions can you kill a query based on?
So there are multiple datums that you can have. Conditions include the system metrics, like if you're exceeding CPU I/O memory given system, or if a particular query is using too much, or if you notice skew on a system. We have close to 100 different datums and growing that you can rule on. We can talk about kind of some future datums that are coming in our next release as well.
Okay. How about other guys?
Probably talk about the anatomy of a rule. Like you're really taking an action on a datum, and then you're defining your rules.
So Louis, why don't you explain that?
Okay.
Yeah. Like
That's really volunteer.
break it down. Break it down.
So I mean, an action is basically you're either throttling the user, you're logging activity of a specific user, or you're in the most godlike way, you're terminating certain users. Datums, as Bharat said, is basically pieces of the system that you're looking at, whether it be CPU, or I/O, or maybe spill file usage, things like that, different things that the query could be causing to the system that you want to be able to protect. Those aspects of the system that you want to be able to trigger an event on. And then the rule is just like a regular expression type rule that says, maybe I'm going to allow this user to use more CPU as long as the max CPU on the system is below a certain threshold. Whereas maybe I can't allow that when the max CPU has exceeded. So there's certain kinds of complex rules that you can get. You can get as complex as you want, which is why, a lot of cases with my users, I suggest to them that before you jump in termination and throttling, you start by using logging, right? Kind of test your rule, make sure that the net is not cast too wide. The analogy, bad analogy. You don't want to catch dolphins in your tuna net, basically.
And termination is probably, that's really worst case, right? Because chances are somebody's going to resubmit it.
Right.
So you want to be able to massage that workload.
And you also better know, you better know who you're terminating as well.
Right, exactly. Sorry.
So Dan, what would be the first rule you would put on a system if you were handed over a complex multi-tenant environment? What would be your first rule?
I think probably I would just want to make sure that no one could take complete control over the system, right? So probably it'd be almost like resource queues.
So CPU based rule?
CPU based where, right, so no one's going to get 100%.
So if you're running,
if I knew I had a big multi-tenant, right? If it was really spotty workload, then maybe you want to allow that sort of thing.
So something like if the running query takes up more than X CPU, then throttle, or
then throttle that back so that the query will still complete, but it takes a little longer.
Okay. How about you, Derek? What would be your first rule?
Logging. So any first step in workload management is finding out the current workloads and how they evolve over time. So I would actually do the GP-DB record action and basically just log any and all important activity going on array. And then once you know what's going on, start looking at throttling. I tend not to be a fan of killing queries unless it's a must, but if that's needed for certain systems because the load's just too heavy for the current configuration, then certainly killing is an option as well. But throttling.
Derek, would you kill a query if it's been running for a week?
Maybe. Yes, I would kill a query.
What about a year?
Probably.
Yeah, at some point in time, you got to call it quits, right? You've been running this query, whatever you thought you were trying to do, at some point it's not going to happen, right?
If you have long enough to wait for them to come back from vacation to ask, it's a good rule of thumb, right?
Generally, I just think a lot of systems don't make sense to be running queries that take more than 24 hours.
Well, right, and there's obviously the need to start looking at segmenting your workloads even further beyond workload management at that point. So you could do things like multi-cluster deployments and whatnot to have sandbox environments and have operational reporting, SLA reporting on another. So that's also an architecture that we go into a lot as well.
All right, so this is definitely going to come up next by somebody. So what do you guys see as the interrelationship, both presently and in the future roadmap for Workload Manager and resource queues? Like, to what degree would you use a resource queue versus a workload management, and how would that change in the future as we build out this product?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if I can start that. So resource queues, are pretty proactive in nature. As a DBA, you set these guys up, you carve out RAM across the segments, and it's really great at achieving and maintaining total system concurrency. That's one of the greatest things about the queues, is we can dictate total concurrency in the array. You can also carve out the RAM individually to those queues. That's a great feature still. But Workload Manager, conversely, or in addition to, is really the right way to phrase it up. It's much more finer grained in nature and much more dynamic and reactive in nature. And so I personally view it as an and, not an either or, but using both together and using each subsystem for what it's best at. Resource queues being the total bigger picture feature and use cases, whereas GP-WLM is much more finer grained and dynamic.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I mean, to me, they complement each other. What we see in the field a lot is customers who are using resource queues that then they just carve up the system too fine-grained, right? They try to have too many queues. Right? There's that happy sweet spot with resource queues where we certainly don't want everything in PG default, but you also don't want to have 50 queues because then you're carving up your system. So Workload Manager really allows you to kind of reduce your number of queues to really what makes sense at a high level, and then use the Workload Manager rules to really get that finer grained tuning.
Okay. Rob, any outlook for how we could improve it in the future, or how these things could relate more in the future?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking to augment a lot of the current capabilities of resource queues. So, for example, getting WLM to be more proactive, and currently resource queues, when you create a new user, you basically assign that user to a resource queue, and whatever query that user runs is going to be running in that resource queue. So allowing more finer grained control, either WLM to say, okay, instead of at a user level, possibly look at query level. Would we be able to say, depending on the type of query and the characteristics that we get, assign it to resource queue A or B? And then in addition, maybe as the query is running and as the system is changing, it's a live system, so being able to dynamically prioritize or deprioritize certain workloads or queues depending on various factors that you might set by rules.
So conceivably, could we set a rule that would impact every query in a queue in the future?
Possibly.
But not now, right?
Not now.
Okay. Okay.
And that almost sounds like an optimizer level on top of the queuing, right? So deciding where things go and how the workload gets segmented based on what the query is or who submits it.
Exactly.
Okay, so the next thing I'd bring up would be memory management. So there's a number of GUCs around virtual memory allocation. There's the resource queue memory stuff. There's memory stuff in rules you could set in the workload manager. So how do we best approach memory management and leverage both the workload manager and the database settings to achieve that? Any thoughts on that?
Start off on that. So an example would be looking at segment level memory guts. So we have GP-WLM protect limit and the runaway query termination, both of which are great in terms of preventing a lot of these out of memory situations, but they have some functionality that we want to augment with WLM. So when you look at runaway query termination, when you're exceeding that particular limit that you set, it's killing your highest resource query. And sometimes that query is the long-running query that you really want running, and all of a sudden these ad hoc queries come and cause runaway query termination to be flipped. And at that point, it's killing the wrong query. And so being able to have more control over that through Workload Manager is actually something that we're coming out with our next release. Saying, okay, when you reach these sorts of limits, rather than just killing this one query by every single time, like the highest resource consumer, kill queries that match these certain characteristics. And that way you have a lot more control over what you're killing on a segment level.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great feature. I know some customers have asked for things like that, is kill based on priority order, things like that, which something like that actually, So the thing is, those GUCs basically, they don't discriminate. They're there to protect the system. right? Whether it be still file gucks or the runaway query termination, it had to protect running out of resources on the system. So
Yeah, but that's still an important point, right? I mean, you still should be setting those gucks. Let's make sure we are communicating that out, right? That they're very important still to be setting for general operation in these cases.
So it sounds like, and to be completely fair, that there is some brain and some control even without the workload manager, right? That, you know, leveraging resource queues, leveraging the memory settings, leveraging these things, you can keep some control, right? But you can take it to the next level.
Yep.
Is that right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
The difference between reptile brain and mammalian brain.
Right. And I guess it's more dynamic, right? You can create complex rules.
Yeah, exactly. The rules can get crazy complex, you know, with the regexes and things like that, which is why I say, you know, kind of test your rules first by logging and making sure that, you know, that you're just getting what you expect.
Okay. So before, I have a couple more questions, but can we go to the chat to see the questions there, Greg?
Sure, let's go for it. I saw that some of them got answered here. Let me scroll up here and pull a few here.
So one of them was the difference between resource queues and WLM. I think we've kind of covered that.
I saw there was a feature request about could WLM send emails to DBAs about conditions.
So that, yeah, why don't we, Bharath, can you talk a little bit more about the different actions that we actually have and the flexibility we have in terms of adding actions in the future?
Yeah, so we're actually going to make it very flexible. So currently, the three main actions that you have, as we mentioned, are log, throttle, and kill. But ultimately, we want to kind of have WLM be a much more comprehensive governor and being able to run any sort of action. So maybe kick off a particular script that you might want in case the system meets certain conditions. In terms of emails, that is a possibility, depending on being able to alert a user or alert a series of users if the system reaches certain conditions as well. So it is easily extensible.
I think it's important though I didn't see the question here, but the log actually it logs to a table. So at the end of the day, you can simply just create a cron job that queries that table and just sends out a report that basically says, here's the stuff that got logged today, right? Here's your top 25. Yeah, you could actually write real queries that say, these are my top queries, these are my top logging events, whatever, those are the types of reports you can run from a table. So I don't know if the question is more if they want to have the email sent the second it happens, right? And, because that can get a little.
What about like
Could get a
SNMP?
little annoying.
Could we trigger SNMP? Could we trigger email? Can we trigger a custom alert system that a customer might have set up? Like, do we have flexibility there?
There are possibilities to set up alerts. In terms of email, every customer has different sort of email mechanisms and various customizations with their servers. So, but we could probably provide a hook into that.
How about just a script?
Yeah, I mean that's the thing that you could say kick off X script if this sort of action happened.
Okay. So there's a question from Greg, and I assume it's not Mr. Chase Greg right here. His question is: sometimes termination of a query through PG terminate backend or PG cancel backend takes a long time to take effect, or sometimes worst case doesn't kill it at all. So given that we're going to be triggering kills, are we going through the normal user-facing kill interface or something kind of deeper backend trigger?
It's the same PG terminate backend and PG cancel backend that the user would run.
So so walking through the halls of Pivotal, I did hear people talking about using the determination that's used by runaway query terminator as well as a potential option, and that based on some tests that had a different profile. Do you hear any rumors about that?
It's possible. We were exploring that opportunity, but it's not fully implemented.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So, I mean, I would say that we definitely have, this thing needs to be able to kill queries and kill them quickly, so we definitely get feedback quickly into that, and I think there are opportunities to do to do things better in terms of terminating queries, and even for that to then benefit future the actual public interface for terminating. But, okay, so Daniel, is WLM part of GPB or it must be purchased separately? Is it installed by default or must be installed separately?
So I guess the first question is it part of open source Greenplum or is it a commercial capability?
So, okay, so Brock, do you want to?
Yeah, it's a commercial add-on, so it's not part of the open source GPDB. It's a value add on top of GPDB.
And if somebody is a customer of Pivotal and has purchased Greenplum with Big Data Suite's course,
Yep.
what is the entitlement to workload management?
They get Workload Manager. It's part of
It's packaged as part of Command Center.
Yeah.
So that's how it's packaged. So it's not packaged as part of the GPDB core. It's packaged as part of Command Center and installed as part of Command Center.
Yep.
Okay, and Command Center is an entitlement if you're a Big Data Suite customer?
Correct.
That's correct.
Right, so in general, I can tell you that from Greenplum and the Pivotal side, we're not trying to create a series of, oh, you could buy this, or you could buy that, or you can buy this, or you can buy that. We have a one subscription to our product suite, which gives you support and any value add component that we add to Greenplum. So it's just one subscription.
Yeah, and that's across the
Um,
entire Pivotal data portfolio.
What's that there?
I was saying that's across the entire Pivotal data portfolio of products.
What's nice about having Workload Manager packaged the way it is, it really allows it to kind of have its own release cycle and kind of not be tied to the core Greenplum releases.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about upside potential here. So we talked about future ideas of how to leverage this technology, like being able to tie into email and all that. But someone put a bug in my ear once, as customer saying, "Could I do more with the Workload Manager since you have this dynamic sensor brain checking my body?" As Bharat said, can I trigger DBA activities?
And keeps the dolphins out of the tuna net.
Keeps the dolphin out of the tuna net. Could I do more DBA activities dynamically? Like, for example, could I set rules in the future to say that the system needs to be vacuumed? So let's do a vacuum. The system, there's a segment failure. Let's trigger a check on that segment. Could I create a full health and system management capability based on that infrastructure?
So, I mean, that is the great vision.
And can it be done by next week?
Can be done by yesterday. Yeah. I mean, yeah, this is a grand vision of what we're looking for with WLM. Initially, we're trying to understand our customer use cases. So some of the initial asks have been around resource queue implementations and looking at multi-tenant systems. Other aspects include disk quotas, being able to handle that. And possibly even deeper integration with command centers. So that way users and especially DBAs are able to resort to using command center to manage and monitor their system.
From a graphical interface.
From a graphical interface rather than just resorting to command line. So there are a lot of grand visions about this, and ultimately we want to look at being able to take a load off of the DBA's plate. Essentially, they have a lot to worry about every single day with the different users, how the data is distributed, etc. And we want to be able to help them manage that much more easily.
So does anybody else have an idea that's grand and they can throw it to the table here that would be a new use case for the Workload Manager, either on the chat or live audience? Derek, I'm looking at you.
It's your chance to log a feature
Okay,
request.
Derek didn't come up with anything. How about you, Louis?
I'm just trying to think of what our users have asked for. I mean, other than the terminating based off of a priority. So again, like you said, not terminating, necessarily a long running query. A lot of this stuff is just getting into the hands of our customers. So I don't know that we have a lot yet that we're getting feedback on.
All right, we got one from the field. We got SK. Can we have top 10 tables that are skewed on each database through WLM? So skewed, let me clarify that, SK. Are you talking about skewed based on disk-based usage or skewed based on
Like processing.
joining, operational skew? I assume so he said disk space. So Brock, let's think like, how could disk space be integrated with workload management? And go ahead.
Yeah, when you're looking at various disk space quotas, you're looking at the database level, the table level, the user level, and you want to be able to control that and control how much space each stratification is using. So being able to control that via Workload Manager and is a possibility. We're still discussing amongst the team and amongst our the various DB teams to understand how to do this.
Okay.
I mean, WLM does have a skew report that's used for both. The thing is with WLM, you're going to see you can't really tell necessarily that it's processing skew or disk skew. But you can certainly see that skew is occurring within WLM.
The other thing I'd add to just help answer SK, it's not related to WLM, but clearly we could leverage some better utility queries just with SQL to be able to tap into the disk-based usage, right, at a lower level. The queries we have now, a lot of them tend to fall back on big catalog queries or file system scans, right? So I think there's clearly a need to be tracking it more fine-grained so that it can be readily and quickly queried. Then the workload manager could leverage other tools. Right?
So I have a more generic question. I'm going to reveal myself as not a deep Greenplum expert like the rest of the people in the room here. But in other parallel processing databases that I've done marketing for in the past, we would have issues where certain, if you ran a SQL query, some parts of the query were parallelizable and some parts were not. I'm wondering if how parallel is your query going to be, and how parallel is the processing could be.
So let me give you the benefit of the doubt there, Greg, and tie it into the big data's question. So he said, we have users who write awful SQL. I know it's not easy, and some AI is not the answer. So how could you figure out that they have bad SQL from the get-go and do something about it, right? So really, first of all, the optimizer is the first component that comes into play here rather than the workload manager, right? The optimizer's job is to get the SQL and figure out how it can be done. Now, one of the primary things the optimizer does is give you a cost, right? So leveraging cost in the workload manager could be potentially an avenue, right? Where we could say, set rules based on people creating ridiculously high cost queries from the gate. Anybody else have any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there's various aspects and metadata. Whatever metadata that we can get from a query before it's dispatched, we could use those as mentioned. We could use those data to be able to rule on whether a query should run or not, or whether it should go to a particular resource key. Like, there's multiple actions that we could take based off of this.
Right,
So
but we're going to rely on the optimizer to give us the input as to the complexity and what can be parallelized and what can't be parallelized. And then let the workload manager be workload manager in its essence is a rules engine, right? So it should be able to gather sources, and if the workload manager team or if the customers or if the field thinks that there's certain information which Greenplum is not exposing that we want to create rules on, it's really not the workload manager's job, because it's really back to the Greenplum community to say, how do we expose better top 10 disk space skewed tables? How do we expose better the parallel so that we can look at, how do we expose anything that then can be created into a rule? Keaton came in here. Keaton's looking for CPU utilization and memory consumed by a single query, disk I/O for a query. Sounds like, are those already existing?
The first one exists. The second one either exists or it's coming in the next release. Are you talking about consumed by a single query across the system, or on a given segment host? Okay. If it's a cross system, yeah, I believe that's coming out in an upcoming release. And disk I/O for a query, I will need to check.
I think we have that already, right? To measure the current disk I/O?
Yeah.
But maybe not for the query. No, it must be. No?
I forget if it's on a system level or a query level.
Okay.
Yeah.
One other thing on the Big Daddy's question too. I mean, one thing we didn't mention is you could actually create a rule on the actual SQL statement as well. And again, if you're really good at regular expressions, you could probably come up with some creative stuff there, like maybe something that parses the query, looking at number of joins or something that query is doing. If that's your definition of an awful SQL, I mean, there's a lot of definitions of what awful SQL could be.
Yeah.
But if it's something
Well,
like that,
just can complete. That's already.
right. So you know, so there is some really complex rules you can do even off of the SQL statement.
It might be interesting to get, if it had some way to get further results and explain, analyze type stuff back, right? So I get these bad queries, maybe I'm controlling them by the cost of raw query, but if I had that sort of data too, then as an admin, I could start to look into going back to the user and say, all right, this part of your query is
So it's
telling us.
So let me tie together like 4 people's questions together here, right? So these things that we want access to, right? There's these different metrics. We really got to drive that. That means that it's not being made available from the core database, right? So Greenplum, based on Postgres, to tie back to Josh's question, we have statistics views, we have PG stat activity, we have the stats tables, right? These should be providing the raw metrics about queries that then we can create rules on. And as we continue to embrace Postgres and to kind of rebase Greenplum off of newer versions of Postgres and add our own data warehousing kind of components into the Greenplum separate tree, we need to collaborate with the Postgres community and the Greenplum community to really have all the rich information in those stats views that people need. And as we're a proprietary workload manager product, but we're not expecting to be the only workload manager product. So other people would also want to have information like a specific column. Is this a select and insert and update or delete? So that the workload manager can just directly go to that table and say, if this is an update query, then to X, right? So we got to both drive the Postgres collaboration, drive the statistics and the tableized structured data about queries, exposing internally. Like Oracle is famous for exposing all kinds of bits and knobs about every query, right? So both Greenplum and Postgres, we need to drive to expose all kinds of bits and knobs, and then let Workload Manager just directly access all those bits and knobs without doing the AI that Big Daddy is afraid of implementing, right?
And pretty much, as mentioned, you know, it's essentially the more inputs that you can provide to Workload Manager, the more powerful it can be in terms of, you know, understanding your system as well as acting on it.
So we are coming to the end of our time.
Okay.
Is there one more round of something you want to do?
Well, certainly at the end I'm going to ask for Greg's call to action, but for the sake of completeness, let's answer SK's last question. And then one other thing. So SK, maximum number of resource queues that GP supports. That's just I think that's just really based on the memory in the system. You know, how much I wouldn't say there's a good generic maximum number. Anybody else want to?
So the technical answer is it depends?
It depends. Let's let Louis and Derek give a shot at it.
Truthfully, I don't know of any maximum. I mean, I think the Pivotal recommends, again, I think you're going to get different opinions. You know, what I tend to look at if I go and look at a customer environment is I'm looking for maybe 4 or 5 resource queues. If I see above that, I'm starting to kind of question things. So I think, you know, there's rules of thumb, and I think everybody kind of has their own opinion. Multi-tenant environments tend to have a little bit more resource queues because they're trying to divide up the user community more fine. But there's a lot of dangers to doing that. So 4 or 5, 3 or 4, somewhere around there is my sweet spot.
Yeah, and certainly some folks like on this chat that I've talked to in the last couple of days, we've seen big Greenplum multi-tenant installations with 30 resource queues. the problem with those is that they're all allocating a certain amount of memory, and then you have to keep, adding RAM to the system to support more and more queues that you've pre-allocated. That's why there is potential huge benefit to do queuing before it hits the DB, and why a workload manager or PG bouncer type queuing could have a long-term advantage. So as far as call to action, if you work for Pivotal, if you work for a customer of Pivotal, and you have a license, then definitely call to action is to download and start using the Workload Manager, because this is going to enable you to set policies and start to think about lights out management of your system. If you're any other calls to action,
I would add that the downloadable sandbox has WLM.
It has the WLM
installed.
It does, yeah.
Right, so anybody can just go and
Anybody can
download
go
that.
download and give it a try.
Give it a try.
License or not at that point.
Yeah. Okay, so that's good.
I was just going to add another call to action would be if you're not currently logging and monitoring your current system workloads, then begin to do that. Because until you can really implement workload management, you need to
Just start with log rules, you're saying, right there?
exactly log rules and just generally getting to know your systems better if you don't already.
Right, and where do you get the workload, the sandbox download?
It's on PivNet under the current version of the database.
That would be network.pivotal.io.
Is it on greenplum.org as well?
There should be a link on Greenplum.
There's a link there.
Okay. Any other calls to action regarding resource queues? Any requests for information? Anything from folks on the line?
The other call to action that I would say, for customers, especially if you're like an infrastructure DBA that's really struggling with this stuff, get to know who your application DBA is, the person from the application side who really understands that workflow, because they're critical to getting any kind of rules in place, effective rules. Is you really can't do it in a vacuum. You can't do it only as a DBA. You have to have that coordination with your application team and understand, because otherwise you're going to do it today and the workload's only going to change in a couple of weeks or a couple of months, and you're just going to be constantly chasing your tail. So it's very important that the teams are working together and coming up with the right rules and how to manage the system.
Sounds good. Derek, you ready to play the music? Sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no problem. Well, we'll just say one final call to action, which is if you actually are appreciating these kinds of tips and tricks, and especially if you have questions specific to yourself, highly recommend, if you're not already a member of the Greenplum user news group, go to greenplum.org. Instructions there how to join, and you can converse with any of these guys, a whole community of experts.